So, picture this. It's World War II, and a single American aircraft, forced down by a simple navigation mistake, falls right into the hands of Italian engineers. What they found inside, though, it wasn't just an enemy plane. No, it was a secret, a terrifying one that would completely flip the script on how they saw the war itself.
You know, when Italian pilots first caught a glimpse of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, this is what they called it, the two-tailed devil. But here's the thing, it wasn't a name born out of fear. It was a joke, a jab at what they saw as this awkward, clumsy design that just went against every principle of elegant Italian engineering.
Yeah, that laughter. It didn't last long. Because once they actually got their hands on one and took a look under the hood, well, the joke was on them. What they found was so profound, so absolutely devastating, it shattered their whole understanding of the enemy they were up against. So that's what we're digging into here. What on earth was hiding under the aluminum skin of this one aircraft that basically served as a crystal ball, showing them a future they couldn't win? All right, so let's set the scene. It's June of 1943. A P-38G Lightning in perfect condition just lands in Sardinia. Talk about an intelligence goldmine, right? It gets handed over to Italy's top engine guy, Filippo Zapata, and his first impression, this thing is an American brute. And he wasn't kidding. I mean, look at these numbers. The P-38 comes in at almost 18,000 pounds fully loaded. That is more than double the weight of Italy's best fighters. So the big question for Zapata and his team was pretty simple. How could something this heavy possibly fly like a fighter? The answer, as they were about to find out, was deeply unsettling.
Okay, so the real shock came when they popped open the engine cowlings, and it was right there, staring at these two massive Allison V1710 engines, that Zapata's team got their first dose of a very hard truth. They weren't just a little behind, they were looking at technology that felt like it was from the future.
In this chart, wow, it just lays out the massive gap between them. The P-38's two engines, we're talking over 2,800 horsepower. Italy's very best fighter, the Mach-E C205V, was pushing less than 1,500. So a single American P-38 had nearly twice the power. But it wasn't just the raw horsepower that was so shocking. It was how the plane was making that power that blew their minds.
The secret weapon was this little device, the turbocharger. Now, Italian engineers knew about this stuff in theory, they'd kicked the idea around, but they'd never managed to get one working in a production fighter. The Americans? They hadn't just done it, they'd crammed two of them into one plane. This let the P-38 keep all that incredible power way up at high altitudes, where other fighters were literally gasping for air.
And what's so fascinating here is it wasn't just about what a turbocharger did, but why Italy just couldn't build one. I mean, look at this list. They didn't have the special alloys to handle the heat, they didn't have the precision casting technology, and they had no way to deal with these insane temperatures and rotational speeds. This thing was a masterpiece of metallurgy that was completely out of their league.
You know, Zapata himself put it very bluntly. It wasn't about trying harder or being smarter. The basic building blocks, the industrial know-how, the material science, they just weren't there. It was a dead end.
And it wasn't just the turbocharger either. To handle all that power, the P-38 had these cool counter-rotating propellers. But that meant they needed these perfect mirror image reduction gears made from super hardened steel. Italy's top metallurgist took one look and basically said, nope, we can't make these. You start to see the pattern, right?
So this led the engineers to a really big realization. They weren't just looking at better parts or a faster plane. They were staring at a totally different philosophy of war, one that could only come from a country with what seemed like endless resources, a country that could afford to, well, to overbuild everything.
Just look at this comparison. Where Italian fighters had these simple, single 12-volt electrical systems, the P-38 had a 24-volt system with two generators. If one conked out, no problem, the other one could power the whole show. It had backup hydraulic pumps. It was all about durability, about being able to take a punch and keep flying. And that's a luxury that adds weight, a luxury you can only afford if you've got ridiculously powerful engines.
And then there was the firepower. Oh, man. All of it was packed right into the nose, so you didn't even have to worry about converging the guns. You've got a 20mm cannon and 4 heavy .50 caliber machine guns with a mind-boggling 2,000 rounds for the machine guns alone. That is more than 3 times the ammo of its Italian rival. This thing wasn't a fighter, it was a flying battleship.
Okay, so the numbers on paper, they were scary enough, but they needed to see it in action. So they brought in the Regia Aeronautica's chief test pilot, Colonello Angelo Tondi, to actually fly this captured devil. And what he felt in that cockpit, it turned all those engineering fears into cold, hard fact.
This was Tandy's verdict, right here. At 25,000 feet, bomber interception altitude, where Italian engines were struggling, the P-38 was just getting warmed up. He said it was still accelerating. It was, in his words, untouchable. There was nothing Italy could send up there to catch it. And that huge arsenal we talked about? Tandi's description was perfect. Firing those nose-mounted guns was like unleashing thunder. Just this concentrated storm of cannon shells and heavy machine gun rounds. You just had to point the nose at something, pull the trigger, and whatever was in front of you was gone.
And all of this led to the final, really crushing realization. The problem wasn't this single amazing plane. This thing wasn't some special one-off prototype. It was just a symptom. The real problem was the industrial behemoth that was churning these things out by the thousands.
Just check out these production numbers from 1943. Italy, with all its factories combined, was struggling to make maybe 150 fighters of all types a month. Meanwhile, intelligence was telling them the Americans were building between 200 and 500 of just this one advanced model every single month.
But this next slide, this really gets to the core of it, the engines. Over the entire war, Italy managed to produce about 13,000 aircraft engines, all types combined. America? They built over 70,000 of just the Allison V-1710, the engine that powered the P-38.
Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. Over 70,000 of one of the most complex engines on the planet. For Zapata and his team, this wasn't just a statistic. It was proof of an industrial power so huge, so overwhelming, it was almost impossible to even comprehend.
Years after the war, Filippo Zapata looked back on that day in 1943, and he said he knew the war was lost the moment he opened those engine cowlings. Not because of one specific part, but because the whole package, the complexity, the power, the sheer number of them being built, it was like a mathematical equation proving they were in a fight they could never, ever win.
So that captured P-38, it wasn't just a plane. It was a message from the future, written in aluminum and steel. Which makes you wonder, right? How often does a single machine tell you the entire story